Hi guys, Rachel Hippolyte here. One of the questions I get asked with regards to brain training and neurofeedback is there any negatives to what you do? Now, one of the type of brain training that I do is what we call linear dynamic. So we don't push the brain in any way. We give information to the brain and then we allow the brain to adapt to that information. Okay, so it's the safest way to make changes by allowing the brain, which has this inherent ability to make the right choices, to go down the most energy efficient route, and then to make the changes that way. Okay, so it really is the safest neurofeedback method to use. Saying that, when we give the brain information, it needs to decide what to do. And so sometimes what we perceive as negatives or as side effects as neurofeedback are actually positives and may just show me that, well, the brain is making shifts, and any shift that it makes is a positive. So, for example, I've got a client at the moment who, after probably only 2 trainings, was just feeling really tearful, really sad. Now, remember, a lot of my clients have learned to fear emotion, have learned to fear feeling sad, feeling angry, because society says that we have to be happy all the time, and that's just not the case. Emotions are messages from the brain. Emotions are there to be dealt with. And the problem with society and the problem with our lives is that we've learned that those emotions are to be feared, and therefore we don't deal with them and we store them neurologically inside, and then they come out with depression and anxiety, because it's just our brain's way of shouting louder. And so this client had suddenly felt really sad all week. Now, to them, it would be a negative, and that's where my job comes in. And I just say, well, actually, it's not a negative. It's your brain making changes. It's your brain shifting. And in fact, when I started training, all of a sudden I had a week where I felt really, really irritable. You wouldn't want to have come near me. And then I had a week, and I trained through that, and I came out the other side, and I felt so much better. And then with the information that my brain was being given, and then felt a week where I needed to cry. I felt sad, but it wasn't a bad sadness. I just felt like I needed to do it. Now, I very, very rarely cry. In fact, I probably haven't cried for years and years and years. Again, that's not a positive thing. Crying is a part of normal dealing with emotion. So if we don't cry, are we dealing with emotions, or are we storing what we were supposed to be dealing with inside? Now, this particular client had been through quite a traumatic childhood. She'd always had to be strong. She'd had to be strong, and that's how I saw her. You know, she was incredibly strong, but incredibly anxious. So she'd never, ever been able to deal with the trauma that she'd felt as a child. She'd always had to be the strong one for her brother. She'd had to look after her brother, even as a young child. And so she'd never, ever dealt with that trauma. So it was still neurologically stored inside. And then all of a sudden, her side effects of that trauma were then to be incredibly anxious. So her brain, because it had never dealt with that trauma, still thought it was real. And it was stored in that part of the brain that was still in the moment. It had never been processed and put into a part of the brain where the brain knew that it was in the past. So she would get hugely anxious. And it was the anxiety that made her come to me. And so we started brain training, and within 2 treatments, she just said, I just can't stop crying. Literally, it's just constant. And so and look, I had to warn her about this prior to the training, that her brain will do what is right with that information. And then, because I then could explain to her that that's a positive. Your brain is now dealing with all that shit that has been stored neurologically that you have never been able to deal with because you have to be strong, because it's not the right time. All of a sudden, your brain felt safe. Your brain felt safe to cry. Your brain felt safe to deal and therefore process and therefore put in the past all that stuff that had never been put in the past that was causing the anxiety. So in fact, when I asked, do you feel sad or do you feel anxious? She said, no, I don't feel anxious. Now she came to me with anxiety. She felt sad, and that was her way of dealing with what was causing the anxiety, all this trauma. Now, it wasn't that she had to go through it. She didn't have to talk about it, but she did have to feel it. So I actually saw it as a positive. And as long as I can then talk, like when I work with clients, I will be with them and support them constantly. So they'll be able to text me if they are feeling sad, and then we can talk through it. And in those situations, I think it's really important that they do have that support, because for her, it was like, oh my God, I'm getting worse. Well, no, she wasn't getting worse. It was just her brain's way of dealing and then processing. And so it's really important to understand. So I see this quite a lot. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2 days, and other times it takes a little bit of time to get through. And all I say is keep training through that time, because you will come out the other side, and then you're going to come out the other side having dealt with that emotion that's been sitting in your neurological system for so long, still causing the anxiety and the depression that you're having today. Not everyone feels it. Some people just go through brain training absolutely like plain sailing. They feel good from day 1 or day 2 or day 3 or day 4. But some people's brains, what they deal with that, and it tends to be the ones that have been through quite traumatic childhoods or experiences recently that perhaps haven't done with it recently. So what I would say is that it isn't necessarily plain sailing when you do neurofeedback brain training, and you may perceive it as a negative, but in fact that negative is actually a positive, because your brain is now processing the stuff that it hasn't processed in the past that's then causing the symptoms that you're getting today. Hope that makes sense, guys, and I'll catch you soon.